So what they're actually after is power, the power particularly to identify and punish their enemies and to reward their friends, to create a two-tiered system around their particular ideological bent, which is the same totalitarian impulse you see in example after example, stretching back at least to the French Revolution. So what they're actually after is power in order to be able, it's not just a rupture from the continuity of today. This is what the critical theory is about. You can't envision the better world. You don't know what the policy necessarily has to look like, but what you do know is that when you have power to reward your ideological friends, to advance the ideological vision, and to punish its enemies, then you'll be able to instantiate this new regime that will somehow be better or more close to the utopian or ideal vision. So this is the primary vehicle that they're after, is their own empowerment in institutional settings and government. But I mean, they do talk about wanting to have a specifically theocratic Christian nation, or at least one that's civically Christian under civil authorities and magistrates. Sometimes, not always, they seem to want to create something that works a little bit like a preference to what they call heritage Americans, which seems to be an ambiguous term that has something to do with how far back your heritage in America goes, but seems also to be a proxy for white or male. They seem to have strong patriarchal ambitions that they think are going to set the world to right. And this is typical of reactionaries. They say everything was going fine, just to kind of like give a big picture, paint a big picture of what the reactionary mind is. Everything was going fine until we were too tolerant. So we're going to go back to the point where the tolerance created a rupture from our inheritance, and we're going to reclaim it. So we're going to be, if we're not supposed to be patriarchal now, things were better when we were, so we're going to be patriarchal again. If we're not supposed to be theocratic now, things were better when we were theocratic, so we're going to go back to that. Racist, anti-Semitic, you name it, same stuff. So we're going to undo the tolerance that has allowed society to slip into degeneracy under our own tyrannical thumb. But their entire program is actually a means to an end, and the end is getting their own positions in power.
There's so much there to unpack. I want to start with this. I'm glad you mentioned the sort of trust me bro movement of political discourse here, because when I think of the woke right, I'm almost exclusively thinking of the online sphere, the broverse, the podcast verse, and in particular the cesspool now known as X. How much of this movement is confined within social media and the online verse, and how much of it is actually seeping into real world political discourse, or even actually electing policymakers with that mindset?
I mean, there's a little bit of electing policymakers, Dusty Devers, for example, in Oklahoma at the state level, state legislature level, being kind of the most prominent example. And it's hard to think of another one. But you will start to see them leaking into local and state level positions. Maybe they're going to get a congressman or two. You could argue that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie are in alignment with them already, for example, in the House. So it's leaking. The problem is that it is predominantly online, and the online is predominantly fake, and there are good data showing that this is a very online phenomenon. There are data from the Network Contagion Research Institute, the NCRI, that have showed in the past that it is primarily young people, young men in particular, who spend 4 or more hours per week greater than their peers online on average, who tend to skew this way. So there are good data showing that this is a very online phenomenon. But the problem is, as I keep talking to people on the Hill, meaning Capitol Hill, is that the majority of the congressional staffers in both parties are under 25 years old right now. And they all disproportionately are, rabidly political, and they're frequently online. They spend more time than most of their peers online, and they're extremely interested in political content. So what you're seeing is that into the halls of power through congressional staffers and interns, this kind of stuff is leaking onto the Hill. Congressmen are busy. We all understand that. We're also seeing it taking over media apparatuses. We saw the debacle at Heritage Foundation, which Kevin Roberts, came to the defense of Tucker Carlson after he interviews Nick Fuentes. And then he tries to say, well, we've got a bunch of these young people, basically, that we've let in that, believe this stuff. And by the way, we have to reach these young people. And so there's a lot of leak into the real world. And a lot of people have suddenly noticed that this thing that seemed like an online phenomenon almost exclusively is having real world impact. And I think the problem, to put it more succinctly, is that online's very fake, but political people are very online, so it leaks into the political universe pretty readily. And I think that we have a bigger problem with it than a lot of people want to admit.
I'm just curious because Charlie Kirk was so influential and so impactful for millions of Gen Z American men.